Hey guys, tonight we slip into the frostbitten world of medieval villages, where the bitterest winters test your will to survive. Picture yourself trudging through a snow-dusted hamlet, the air so sharp it stings your lungs, icicles dangle from thatched roofs, and the sun barely peeks above the horizon, leaving you in a twilight that chills to the bone. You're a peasant, no fancy castle to shield you, just a flimsy hut and your wits. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without some serious medieval know-how. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the door, wooden planks groaning under your bare feet. Outside, the dawn glows pale, a watercolor sky smeared with grey snowbanks rise like barricades, and the world feels silent except for the hollow roar of hunger inside you. Medieval winters were brutal, because harvests always decided life or death. If the autumn was generous, maybe your family stored enough grain, beans, or salted meat. But if the yield was poor, well, you're standing in the doorway now, staring at months of gnawing emptiness. The average peasant diet in winter meant less than 2,000 calories per day, sometimes much less. That number sounds fine today, but try chopping wood or hauling water on that intake, and your body burns through reserves faster than butter on hot bread. Hunger gnawed so constantly, it shaped the rhythm of life. Every action patching clothes, feeding animals, walking to the mill was punctuated by a dull ache in your belly. And you can't exactly binge snack, because there's no medieval version of Doritos. You eat what the earth gave months ago, and once it's gone, well, good luck. Historians still argue whether widespread winter famines were annual inevitabilities or rare crises. But what's certain is that hunger always loomed. You sit by a rough wooden table, eyeing a pot with yesterday's pottage, a thin stew of barley, cabbage, maybe a stray turnip. It smells sour, but in medieval logic, sour just means it has extra flavor. Your children stir awake, coughing lightly, cheeks pale. Everyone waits for you to scoop the first ladle. You pour steaming spoonfuls into wooden bowls. It's warm, at least. Warmth counts for more than taste. The reality is you're already planning rationing in your head. That sack of barley in the corner, it needs to stretch till April. The salted fish hanging by the rafters, one per week if you're disciplined. Medieval people had to treat food storage like financial budgeting, with the penalty for overspending being starvation. Outdoors, you crunch across frozen mud. The fields are bare skeletons of stubble, once tall with wheat but now buried under ice. You bend and scratch tally marks into a wooden post near the Barna farmer's version of a countdown calendar. Every day survived is a small rebellion against nature's indifference. There's a quirky tidbit here. Medieval folks believed winter hunger wasn't just physical but moral. A lean stomach supposedly tested your faith and humility. Some even argued too much food in winter was suspicious, as if you'd cheated nature. Imagine starving and still feeling guilty for chewing too loudly. That's medieval Catholic guilt at its finest. Still, despite the ache in your belly, you find moments of grim humor. Your neighbor waddles past, wrapped in 3 layers of patched wool, muttering about how his last hen laid an egg in January, a miracle, or maybe just confusion. You chuckle, because when food is scarce, even one egg feels like divine intervention. You shuffle back indoors, shoving straw around the floorboards to block icy drafts. Your children lick their bowls, chasing every last drip of broth. The hut smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and boiled cabbage. Your partner looks at you and mutters, "If only the snow was edible." You grin, scoop a handful of powdery white snow from the window ledge, and pretend to bite it. Everyone laughs. In a world of constant scarcity, laughter itself feels like a warm meal, but the truth gnaws at you. There are still 3 long months until green shoots return to the fields. You wonder which family will crack first, who will barter away their last hen for a sack of barley, who will bury another child before spring. You push the thought aside, because survival in this season requires stubborn hope as much as firewood, so you slurp your sour stew, hug your cloak tighter, and prepare yourself. The day is only beginning, and medieval hunger always demands more than your stomach, it demands your spirit. Asterisk, the morning grows harsher as you step into the forest. A brittle silence, muffled by snow-laden branches. Every breath burns your lungs, and your boots crunch through a crust of ice. Out here, the most pressing survival task isn't hunting wolves or chasing deerets, dragging home enough fuel to keep the hearth alive. Firewood is more valuable than gold in January. You're not just warming your toes. You're ensuring the difference between waking tomorrow or becoming another stiff body found come thaw. But firewood isn't simply lying around. Most of the good logs were cut in autumn, neatly stacked. If you were lucky or ambitious, now you wander, axe in hand, searching for fallen branches, storm-snapped limbs, or the occasional withered trunk still standing. Your shoulders ache before you even swing. When you finally strike, the sound echoes sharp and lonely across the valley. A chunk splits free, smelling faintly of resin, promising at least a few hours of warmth. Medieval peasants, new forests, weren't infinite. Lords owned most of the wooded land, and cutting unauthorized timber could get you fined or worse. That's why you mostly look for deadwood. It's technically fair game. Though, let's be honest, if your children are freezing, you might just risk sneaking a green log from the Manners Grove. Historians still argue whether peasants respected these forest rights consistently, or whether they quietly ignored them whenever hunger outweighed fear. Your back aches as you drag branches onto a crude sled. The snow clings stubbornly, slowing every step. You mutter, "This is like CrossFit, but with fewer protein shakes." And no, there's no medieval gym membership, just an unpaid life-or-death workout program called Surviving January. Quirky tidbit, some communities even rationed turf, peat bricks cut from marshes that burned slowly but stank like 1,000 rotten eggs. Imagine curling up beside that aroma, whispering, "Ah, yes, cozy." Yet 2 people without oak or ash, peat, was lifeblood. As you pause, leaning against a birch, you hear faint rustling overhead. Squirrels skitter across branches, their tiny footprints stitching delicate lines into the snow. For a second, you envy them, they've got nut stashes hidden all over. And here you are, an apex predator, reduced to scavenging sticks. The absurdity makes you chuckle. You continue hauling, fingers stiff, rope biting your palms. Back at the cottage, your partner peers out, face tight with worry. The pile by the wall has shrunk alarmingly. You dump today's find beside it with a proud grunt. Children cheer weakly. Wood isn't food, but it's close because cold kills faster than hunger. Inside, the hut fills with the sharp temps of smoke as logs crackle to life. Your eyes water, but you smile anyway. Fire brings more than heat. It means cooking's possible. It means frostbite retreats a little. It means you can pretend, for a few hours, that winter is not an enemy but just a stubborn guest. The evening falls early, shadows stretching long. As the wind howls outside, you sit near the hearth, body thawing. And while you listen to the wood hiss and spit, you realize something essential. Fuel isn't just survival, it's dignity. In a world where nature strips you bare, the flame is your rebellion. The fire burns low, flickering weakly against the damp stones of your hearth. Smoke snakes upward, blackening the thatch and curling into your eyes until they sting. You cough, wipe your face with a rough sleeve, and still lean closer, because, however choking it feels, this hearth is the thin line keeping your family from freezing stiff. The hearth isn't glamorous. Forget modern fireplaces with carved mantles or Netflix log streams. Yours is a shallow pit lined with stones. Maybe backed by clay daub, if you were lucky enough to patch it before winter. A crooked iron hook hangs over the flames, holding a battered pot. Most of your meals taste faintly of ash, because, well, ash gets everywhere. But you accept it, because fire makes food possible and life bearable. You sit huddled close, children practically glued to your sides like small, shivering barnacles. You know the fire's radius: one step too far, and your fingers numb instantly; one step too close, and your clothes might smolder. People in medieval huts practically lived in this balance. Home wasn't a cozy spread of rooms. It was a smoky box with everyone orbiting the same tiny sun. Here's a mainstream fact. Historians note that many peasants' huts didn't even have chimneys until the later Middle Ages. Smoke simply drifted out through a hole in the roof. Didn't imagine months of red, watery eyes, soot-caked rafters, and lungs marinated in wood smoke. It was bad enough that some scholars suspect constant smoke exposure may have actually lowered infection risks by killing airborne bacteria. So yes, you're choking, but hey, maybe fewer colds. Silver lining. Quirky tidbit: in some regions, people dried strips of meat or even hung laundry right above the hearth. Nothing like a shirt dripping pork grease to say, multitasking achieved. You glance up now, squinting at those salted fish dangling from rafters, their skins curling in the heat. They're treasures, preserved against hunger, but also of the rotting ocean variety. Your partner feeds the fire with one of yesterday's precious logs. The crackle feels like applause. For a moment, everyone watches the flames dance as if hypnotized. Fire isn't just warmth, it's entertainment. No medieval, Netflix, no TikTok, no chess set even. Unless your lord dropped by with a spare board. Just flames popping, children giggling at sparks, and adults lost in thought. But the fire must be managed carefully. Too small, and you freeze. Too big, and your stack of logs disappears in a week. That's why you ration, counting each stick like coins. Tonight, you toss in only thin twigs, trying to stretch the glow. You mutter, maybe if we all hold our breath, the fire won't need as much oxygen. The kids laugh, trying at cheeks, puffing red. You chuckle, too sarcasm is cheaper than kindling. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were skilled at fire control or just winged it daily. Some evidence suggests careful planning, charcoal burning, ash saving, ember banking. Others think most folks were too tired to strategize and simply did whatever worked. What's certain is that every peasant learnt the art of coaxing life from damp logs. Fire starting wasn't optional, it was an Olympic sport you trained. For since childhood, as night deepens, you spread a thin blanket on the floor near the hearth. Children curl up first, closest to the warmth. You and your partner settle farther back, shoulders brushing, feet nearly numb. The smell of smoke settles thick in your hair and clothes. Tomorrow, you'll wake up coughing, same as today, but now your eyelids droop to the lullaby of crackling wood. The hearth, you realize, isn't just a tool, it's the center of medieval survival. It feeds, warms, heals, and even spices. People tell stories here, patch clothes here, carve spoons here. The entire cycle of winter grinds forward with this smoky heart beating steadily. And without it, the silence of snow outside would claim you quickly. So you hold the moment gently. The hiss, the warmth, the glow reflected in tired eyes. Survival feels less like conquest and more like stubbornness. The refusal to let the cold win. Asterisk. You stand, bones creaking like the rafters, and reach for the heap of winter armor that passes for your wardrobe. The first rule you live by: linen next to skin, wool for the world. You slip into a long linen shirt scratchy from too many with lye soap, but merciful against the prick of woolby, 'cause even you know the mainstream fact every reenactor loves to recite: medieval people usually wore linen closest to the body since it could be washed more often, while wool, tricky to launder, stayed as the outer layer. You tug the hem straight, inhale, and shiver as the cold climbs your legs like a determined cat. Next come the bride's baggy linen shorts with a belt rope hand, then the hose. Woolen tubes that cling to your thighs and calves. You perform the winter dance, hop, pull, curse softly, and tie. If you're unlucky, the wool bites. If you're lucky, it only grumbles. You've darned the knees so often the patches have their own patches, a lumpy quilt of survival. You mutter, medieval couture, now with 200% more texture. and grin at your reflection in the pot lid, which kindly refuses to be a mirror. Joke 1, courtesy of the kitchenware. You add a kirtler long wool tunic, then another if you own it. Layers trap air, and air is the cheapest insulation you'll ever find. Everything smells of smoke from the hearth, and a faint oceanic note from those salted fish swaying above it. Remember that rotting ocean air freshener you admired last night? Congratulations, it now lives in your sleeves. You cinch a belt to keep cloth from flapping, and to hang the knife that does everything: slice bread, cut twine, pry ice from the well rope. Fashion Week, year 1325, the belt is in. Over it all, you swing your cloak, a felted wool half-circle that settles on your shoulders like a patient boulder. The clasp has broken twice. You've replaced it with a loop of leather thong. Cloaks are equal parts blanket, door, and privacy screen. You draw the edge up to your cheek and feel the lanolin the sheep kindly left behind. Quirky tidbit time. Rubbing fat or grease into wool makes it more water-shedding. Some folks swear by tallow or even fish oil. Effective, yes. Fragrant, also yes. You shrug, smelling like a candle shop that survived a herring storm, is still better than freezing. Your hood your best friend goes on last. It's a simple chaperone with a long tail, the liripipe that you wrap once around your neck. It works like a scarf and, bonus, doubles as a twirling prop when you're bored waiting for the well bucket to thaw. You tug it low over your eyebrows until your breath fogs the wool. The edges itch. You consider your old cap of felt and decide to add it under the hood. 2 hats are better than 1. 3, and you start to look like a festive mushroom. Joke 2, if anyone asks, you're layering for character development. Shoes are next. Leather turnshoes curved just enough to make you feel fancy for 10 seconds. Then reality. The soles are thin. The ground is a rumor of knives, and snow melts into everything. You stuff a twist of clean straw inside each shoe. Person's down duvan, tie them tight. That straw swaps out every few days unless you forget, and your toes write angry letters. Some neighbors skip socks entirely and use foot wraps, folded cloth bound like a secret. Others knit or nail-bind thick socks, each stitch a small act of defiance against frostbite. Historians still argue whether peasants commonly had multiple pairs of footwear or rotated one pair to exhaustion. But your lived reality is simple. Dry is life, wet is misery. You glance at the wooden patterns you keep by the door. Elevated clogs that strap under shoes to lift you out of slush. They turn muddy lanes into tolerable lanes and transform you into a walking percussion section. Clack, clack, clack here, personal drumline. Children laugh when you march by. You call it your winter concert series. Joke 3 lands with a tiny bow. Colors. Your neighbors love to claim everyone wore endless brown, but your own kirtle holds a stubborn memory of madder red that refuses to quit. And your partner's hood still whispers of woad blue in the seams. Dyes fade, yes, and bright cloth costs, yes, but even the poorest yard can surprise with plant-stained cheer. Historians still argue whether village folk normally wore lively dyes or mostly undyed greys and browns. What you know is that any scrap of color in January looks like a prayer someone forgot to say. You run a hand across the cloak's inside seams, feeling where fulling tightened the weave months ago. The mill down river pounds cloth with water-driven hammers technology that's been spreading for centuries, making wool thicker, warmer, more windproof. It's a small miracle, a machine turning river patience into insulation. Mainstream fact. Tucked in, fulling mills are a medieval workhorse, and without them, your cloak would be a flappy suggestion instead of a shield. Maintenance is a ritual. Every evening, you sit by the hearth, glow and mend. You knot threads, splice edges, and couch patches with neat little whip stitches. You keep a tiny kitbone needle, waxed linen, odds of yarn and a leather pouch tied to your belt so you can triage a sleeve on the road. Your partner is even faster with the needle, turning rags into garments the way a good cook turns scraps into supper. And yes, you've learned the trick of sewing a patch from inside the sleeve so the wind doesn't catch the edge. Ugly a little, effective. Very. On the coldest nights, you upgrade sheepskin, wool-side in, a hood lined with rabbit. Mittens, so thick you could probably pick up a coal. You've seen some folks tuck moss along the chest under the tunic for extra insulation on long walks of forest's worth of warmth, quietly borrowed. You smile at the memory of stuffing a strip of felt under your belt like a kidney warmer. Your neighbor called it your secret second belly. Cleanliness is not a winter sport, but you try. The linen layer you can wash, when the ice in the bucket doesn't bite back. The wool, you beat it with sticks, brush off ash, and hang it where smoke can chase bugs away. There's that old fuller's trick stale urine used to scour grease from wool in proper workshops. But you're not about to pour that on your cloak at home unless the situation becomes truly heroic. If it does, you'll tell yourself it's artisan fermentation. By midday, you are a walking onion of fabric. Each layer whispers as you move, trapping breath, hoarding heat, negotiating with wind. You can work in this bend lift turn because the genius of the clothes isn't elegance. It's compromise. Linen that doesn't bite. Wool that forgives. Snow, a cloak that sleeps as a blanket. If a stitch pulls or a seam pops, you repair it before bed. Because holes invite wind the way a door invites a draft. When you step outside, the air gnaws the small square of cheek you forgot to cover. You pull the hood lower, wrap the liripipe tighter, and square your shoulders. You look like a worn banner and feel like a stubborn fortress. The wind tests your patches, finds them good, and moves along. Inside the layers, your heartbeat slows. To a steady drum, you can haul wood like this, you can break ice like this, you can stir pottage like this. And when night comes, you can sleep with your cloak over the children and your hood tugged down. Winter is not impressed by fashion, and fashion does not exist to impress winter. Your clothes aren't statements, they're treaties carefully negotiated, often revised, never fully signed. And when you hang everything by the fire at day's end, the smoke paints it darker, the salt fish adds a signature, and the wool relaxes as if sighing. Tomorrow, the routine returns. Linen, hose, tunic, cloak, hood, shoes with straw, patrons at the door. You'll step into the same fabric story, and carry it another day forward, stitch by stubborn stitch. The hearth smolders low, but your stomach growls louder than the crackling embers. You shuffle to the pot, wooden spoon in hand, and stir what passes for breakfast pottage. It's not glamorous. Imagine a watery mash of barley. Cabbage leaves too tough for summer eating, and maybe a handful of beans. But this thin gruel is the medieval equivalent of oatmeal. Reliable, bland, and just enough to keep your legs moving. You ladle out steaming portions. One by one, watching the pot's bottom appear sooner than you'd like. Every spoonful feels like subtraction from a dwindling account. Hunger in winter isn't sudden, it's a slow leak. That sack of grain must last until April, and every extra serving now is tomorrow's regret. You swallow hard and pretend you're full, but your children lick their bowls as if they might find flavor hidden in the wood grain. Here's the mainstream fact: pottage was the daily staple for medieval peasants, especially in winter. It simmered all day, thickened with whatever scraps were left, fruits, peas, onions, or a sprinkle of herbs. If you were rich, maybe you added meat. If you were poor, you added water. Some families even kept the same pots simmering for days, topping it off each morning. Which makes you wonder whether you're eating stew or archaeology. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes peasants tossed in stale bread, using it as a sponge to soak up the thin broth. This sop is where we get the phrase, sopping wet. So yes, linguistics owes its debt to watery cabbage stew. You raise your spoon, blow gently, and sip. The taste is earthy, faintly sour. You mutter, fine dining. Style, joke 1. Your partner rolls their eyes, but smiles anyway. It's easier to swallow food when you're also swallowing laughter. As you scrape the pot, you can't help thinking of how unequal the world is. Lords up at the manor feast on roasted venison, spiced pies, and ale thick enough to chew. Meanwhile, you debate whether to save the last onion for today or tomorrow. Historians still argue whether peasants really ate meat only on feast days. or whether small game like rabbits and birds were more common than records suggest. What's not up for debate, the gulf between what you eat and what your Lord eats could fit a castle moat by midday. Your belly complains again. You chew a crust of bread so hard it could double as a weapon. Bread is the other half of survival: rye, barley, sometimes oats, depending on your soil. White wheat bread. That's a luxury you taste only at weddings or funerals. You gnaw, jaw aching, and whisper, "This is artisanal sourdough." If artisan means moldy and slightly weevil-flavored, joke 2 lands between coughs. You know fasting is coming. The church calendar dictates not only feast days but also lean ones. Lent, Advent, Ember days all signals to eat even less when you're already starving. You sigh at the irony. Religion teaches discipline, but your stomach already practices it involuntarily. Your children ask why saints want them to skip fish when fish is barely on the menu. You shrug, because even saints liked to test peasants. Joke 3, whispered so God doesn't hear. By nightfall, the pot bubbles again, thin as ever. You stir, listening to the hiss of wood and the rumble of your belly. Winter meals aren't about pleasure, they're about persistence. Spoon after spoon, day after day, until green shoots finally break the soil and remind you that life can taste fresh again. Asterisk, the scent of brine lingers in the rafters. Sharp and salty, mixing with wood smoke until it becomes the smell of survival itself. You glance upward at the strips of pork, the curled fillets of fish, the precious slabs of meat salted back in late autumn. Each one is a treasure, dangling like a charm against famine. You know every strip by heart. This one from the pig you slaughtered at Martinmas. That one traded for onions with your neighbor. They're not snacks, they're winter's ransom. You take down a slab. Thick crystals of salt still clinging to its edges, and slice off a thin piece. The knife drags slow, and the meat feels tougher than shoe leather. You drop it into the pot with beans and barley, hoping boiling will soften it. Everyone stares at the bubbling water, hypnotized. The aroma, faint as it is, makes your mouths water, like children in front of a bakery. Mainstream fact. Salting was the most common preservation method for medieval meat and fish. Without it, food spoiled within days. With it, you could stretch pork or herring for months. Salt was expensive, mined from deposits or evaporated from seawater, and often controlled by lords or merchants. To own a sack of it meant you had leverage. In lean seasons, that's why you guard every pinch as though it's silver dust. Quirky tidbit, salted fish, especially herring, was so important that entire trade routes and markets grew around it. Some towns practically smelled of nothing but barrels of herring stacked to the rafters. Imagine dating back then. Sorry, I can't kiss you, you reek of lentfish. Yet everyone smelled the same, so maybe romance was just extra briny. You chew a piece now, jaw working hard. The flavor is intense, almost overwhelming, as though the ocean itself has parked on your tongue. You mutter, "At least I'll never lose this taste, it's seared in for life." Joke 1 lands as your child gags and gulps water. Historians still argue whether peasants actually had regular access to salted meat, or if that luxury belonged mostly to wealthier farmers and townsfolk. Some evidence suggests that poorer families relied more on dried beans, peas, and dairy. But even a single salted herring could be stretched into multiple meals, boiled, chopped, or mashed into pottage. In your hut, one fish becomes a week's worth of seasoning. Not much protein, but plenty of morale. The meat tonight is thin, but spirits rise. Children laugh, imagining the pig it came from. Your youngest insists it must have been a heroic pig, worthy of a feast in Valhalla. You chuckle, patting your stomach. If that pig's in Valhalla, he's probably laughing at us right now. Joke 2 draws a smile even from your weary partner. But salted food has its curse. Your throat dries and you gulp water, which you hauled frozen from the well at dawn. The salt makes you thirstier, and you worry. Too much salty meat without enough liquid can make illness worse. You ration carefully, cutting small slices, burying them in pottage so the salt leaches into broth. That broth becomes liquid gold-warm, filling, and vaguely pork-flavored. You tuck the remaining slabs back into their storage spot. Wrapped tight, hidden from pests and neighbors' curious eyes. Theft in winter is common. A single stolen strip could mean disaster, you sigh, thinking of your friend down the road whose salted stores spoiled because the brine barrel leaked. Whole months of work on, it's why you check your stores daily, tapping each sack and sniffing each slab like a paranoid accountant. Later, as the night howls outside, you gnaw the last of your salty supper. The fire flickers, the children yawn, and the smell of brine clings stubbornly to your skin. Salted food is never glamorous, never enough, but it buys you time. And in winter, time is the most nourishing thing of all. You step out into the white hush and make for the little rise behind the cottage, the unremarkable lump beneath. The snow that holds the difference between supper and going to bed with a story instead of a meal. Your pattens clack over the crust. That cheerful winter percussion you've been touring around the village, and your cloak thumps a steady rhythm against your back. You kneel, brush away powder, and there it is. The straw-lined hatch to the root pit, a door into the earth's cool memory. The hinges complain, because everything complains in January. But the smell that rises is kind damp soil, clean straw, and the faint sweetness of sleeping vegetables. Even your salted fish perfumed sleeves step back and let this aroma speak. Learned to build this pit in late autumn, when the ground was still willing to be persuaded. First a shallow trench, then a lining of stones to shed meltwater, then bundles of straw and bracken to cradle the harvest. You layered roots like a careful mason, carrots, parsnips, turnips, beets, big onions, each separated by straw so rot can't gossip from one to the next. The mound got capped with more straw and a thick skin of earth, tamped hard, sometimes even thatched with old turfs, so the weather reeds field, instead of buffet. There's a tiny vent you can plug with a rag on the worst nights. Open it on milder days so the air can curl through and keep everything from sweating. You called it a vegetable chapel, because reverence makes you gentler with your hands. Mainstream fact, to keep your confidence up while your fingers freeze. Peasants across medieval Europe relied on earth clamps and pits to store roots and tubers through winter. Permanent stone-walled cellars were more common in grander houses or monasteries. For everyone else, the ground itself was the pantry, cool and dark, naturally humid, naturally stingy, with light the perfect ward against sprouting. You reach in and pull free a carrot, purple as twilight at first glance, gold at the core when you nick it with your knife. Medieval carrots aren't the polite supermarket orange you picture. Those arrive centuries later with Dutch plant breeding. Your prize today is gnarled, sweet bitter, and a little muddy. You rub it on your cloak and grin. Vintage. You whisper to nobody, because the snow loves secrets. Joke 1. Faint as breath. Turnips come up next, round and stubborn. There, skins dulled by soil, but firm as good promises. You tap each with a knuckle. The hollows betray rot. Those you carry away and bury deeper, beyond the reach of pots, a quiet little funeral with a straw shroud. Onion braids lie coiled like sleepy serpents. You unhook a few, careful not to bruise the papery skins. Somewhere under the top layer, a shy beet bleeds a blush into the straw, beautiful and ominous, so you set it aside for the pot today and spare tomorrow the stain. Quirky tidbit to share while you work. Some families layer roots in clean sand, inside big glazed jars or wooden tubs, corking the top with linen and wax, so mice stay pious. Others tuck apples into the pit but keep them in their own corner, because apples are friendly to noses and suspicious to neighbors. Their scent can coax sprouting where it's not wanted. A single apple in the wrong heap is like the village. Gossip suddenly, everyone grows new ideas. You learned that once and never forgot. You check the little marker sticks you jammed around the interior in November. 1 notch for carrots, 2 for turnips, 3 for onions, because labels in winter are best when you can read them with gloves on. A mouse has nibbled an edge of straw near the wall, but the cats do their patrols, and you've tied tiny sprigs of rowan above the threshold for luck. Historians still argue whether protective charms were everyday tools or occasional flourishes, but you've noticed how much calmer you feel when the red berries hang overhead. And calm counts as real. The pit gives you other gifts too, cabbages wrapped like sleeping babies in outer leaves, tight as fists. A cache of wrinkled apples, their skins tanned to leather but their hearts still sweet when sliced and poached. A few pears gone to glass, perfect for stewing into a winter desert that lets your children believe in kindness again. You stack your finds into a wicker creel, each layer bedded with straw. The weight becomes a kind of comfort proof that the earth keeps your promises better than your memory. A little moisture beads on the stones. You wipe it away and check the drain channel. Flooding turns a pit into a soup you didn't order. You poke the vent, sniff the air, decide to open it wider this afternoon when the sun pretends to exist. Managing a root pit is part gardening, part housekeeping, part very slow flirtation with mold. You keep the light out, you keep the air moving, you keep the temperature behaving like a serious adult. Back in the cottage, the pit's treasure turns to work. You set the onions to sweat in the pot with a thimble of fat saved from last week's pork and glistening as a miracle. The crackle smells like good news. Carrots and turnips follow, chopped into moons and coins. You toss in a beet and watch the broth blush, then relent and add barley so dinner can argue with hunger on equal footing. Your partner passes you a pinch of dried thyme from the beam overhead, a luxury that costs nothing but last summer's attention. You mention the debate of the day as the pot murmurs. Historians still argue whether field turnips were a widespread peasant staple before the big crop rotations of later centuries, or mainly a garden side act. Your hands don't care. They only know that what you pull from the ground goes into the pot, and the pot goes into your children. And that's the entire point. While the stew persuades itself into flavor, you do the little cellar chores that keep tomorrow from scowling. You rub the onion braids with your thumb, feeling for soft spots. You repack a lumpy corner of straw. You chalk a quick tally on the beam: carrots low, parsnips steady, onions acceptable. The chalk is a bit of leftover primer from a mason's job months ago, traded for eggs. Luxury stationery, peasant edition. Joke 2, delivered with a flourish of dust. Mainstream fact keeps you company. Humidity matters. Too dry, and the roots shrivel into little ideas of themselves. Too wet and they rot romantically, which is not the plot you want. That's why pits and clamps and caves and half-basement cellars did their quiet magic. Hearth walls steady the moisture, and straw breathes without tattling to frost. When a thaw threatens to slip into the pit, you add more turfs to the mound and stomp them flat. A dance your neighbors recognize from across the field. The January jig, starring desperation and a very serious face. A neighbor stops by with a trade. 2 heavy leeks for a braid of your smaller onions. You shake on it, gossip just long enough to remember there's still a world beyond snow and stew, and tuck the leeks in the shade near the door. Another quirk floats up with his breath. He stores his apples in a dry loft wrapped in rye straw, and swears a quiet prayer over them on 12th night to keep them sound. You nod. Maybe prayer helps the apples, maybe it helps the person. Either way, apples seem to enjoy being believed in by evening. The stew tastes like patience. The carrots have softened into sweetness, the turnips have surrendered their bite, and the beet has tinted everything the color of a cheerful bruise. You break a heel of yesterday's bread into the bowls so the edges drink. And for a moment the cottage goes quiet, except for spoons knocking wood. The warmth settles into faces. The smoke braids with time. The onion's tenderness explains itself in taste. You lift your bowl and hold it under your nose longer than necessary. Steam fogging your lashes. Root pit cuisine, you announce, proudly seasonal, aggressively local, painfully sustainable. Joke 3 lands with a small laugh and a clink of spoons. In here, irony is a condiment you can afford. When the pot's last whisper fades, you set aside the few firm carrots left on the board for tomorrow. Tuck the onion braid back on its peg, and lay the straw lid across the creel so mice read the sign that says occupied. You plan one more trip to the pit in the morning, after the night does its worst and the door of earth holds steady. You blow out the rushlight, draw the cloak around the children, and listen to the wind gnaw at the eaves. Under your floor, under the snow, the roots sleep on. The ground keeps watch. The straw breathes, and you patched, smoky, salted, stubborn you get to try again tomorrow. You wake before dawn to the sound that rules the season, a dull crystalline crack from the yard, as if the world itself is tightening its belt another notch. Water has turned to stone again. You pull on your layers linen, wool, cloak and step into the grey toward the well, its little mouth rimmed with frost. A thin skin of ice glittering over the bucket on the windless dot. Your pattens clack their percussion on the hard ground. Breath billowing like smoke you can't spare. The rope is stiff as an old bone. You work it through gloved hands, feeling the frozen fibers bite anyway. The crank complains. Everything complains in January: wood, rope, joints, even patience. And yet here you are, negotiating with ice because thirst doesn't negotiate back. You chip the bucket's surface with a stick, then slide the oak lid aside from the wellhead and peer down. Dark, shining cold. You lower the bucket slowly so it doesn't smash the stones or stir the mud. Somewhere below, a skim of ice waits. You hear it crack, delicate at first, then decisive as the bucket shoulders through. It's the most satisfying sound of the morning. Tied only with the slap of a steaming bowl. Later. Mainstream fact. Medieval peasants absolutely did drink water, especially from wells, springs, and streams. The old cliché about everyone drank ale instead is only true. Small ale was common, yes, but mostly because boiling made it safer, and the barley added calories. If your well was good, you drank from it. If it was bad, you risked bellyache or worse. The bucket rises dripping icicles, a little winter chandelier. The first mouthful stings your teeth and tastes faintly of iron and stone. You swallow, gasp, and mutter, medieval iced luck. On the side, joke one fogs into the air and vanishes like good intentions. Animals drink first. That's a rule older than your roof. A cow watered gives milk. A goat watered stops yelling. Chickens only need a shallow dish, but they regard it like philosophers and then tip it over anyway. You replace it without swearing, because the children are listening, and also because swearing wastes heat. Quirky tidbit: some folks floated a wooden disc in watering troughs, so ice formed around it, but not over the whole surface. Lift the disc, and you've got a ready-made hole. You try it today, and it works well enough that you feel like a wizard with a very niche spell. Back at the well, you tie on a second bucket. The rope sneaks a raw burn across your palm where the glove seam slips. You blow on the spot and pretend it's part of your spa package. The crank squeals. You promise it a smear of tallow later, turning yourself into a therapist for objects. The village path is already scribbled with footprints to other springs. People name them like friends. Lady Well by the Ash, St. Bride's Spring in the copse, the Cold Eye out near the pasture. On feast days, someone might hang a ribbon, and in summer, they even dress the well with flowers. Historians still argue whether such rites were old pagan offerings or just later church-approved habits, but the water never seemed to mind either way. You haul again and again. The tub in the cottage needs filling for cooking, soaking peas, washing little faces, and keeping a kettle humming by the fire. The sound of the windlass becomes your winter heartbeat. Creak, splash, grunt, step, creak, splash, grunt, step. A practical thought keeps you honest. If the well freezes too deep, you'll be melting snow in pots. Snow looks generous piled high, but it turns stingy in a cauldron hole. Pans of it collapse into a single cup. Worse, it devours your firewood. You call it liquid disappointment. Joke 2 makes your partner chuckle through chapped lips. You think of the ale barrel in the corner, a weak brew made back in autumn. Safer than doubtful water, even for children. Not a party drink, just bread you can pour. It spares the well. When floods muddy, still today you crave plain water, clear, sharp, honest. Historians still argue whether peasants regularly boiled drinking water or only during sickness. The truth likely changed with each household's fuel supply. By mid-morning, your shoulders hum with a dull ache. A neighbor hacks at her well with an iron bar, the local ice key. She grins and calls, "Good day for swimmers," which is medieval for absolutely not. You reply you're training for the strongman contest. Bucket division. Joke 3 earns her cackle and a wave. Back home, you skim the tub with a ladle, fishing out a stray cabbage leaf last night's stew, saying hello. The water looks clearer now, you feel better. You warm a kettle, pour the first cup into dough, the second into a basin for your hands, and the third to the children, who pretend the steam is dragon breath. At day's end, you close the well, sweep away shards of ice so no hoof or bare foot slips in the dark, and carry the last pail inside like an offering. The hearth hisses when you top it up. The cottage exhales. You sip slowly, chest loosening. And for a moment, the water tastes like a promise. Tomorrow, you'll haul again, and again. Until the thaw finally lets you rest. Asterisk, the night howls colder, the rafters creak, and you gather your family into the single room where warmth is hoarded like treasure. But tonight, the humans aren't the only ones crowding close. You pull open the side door of the lean-to, and usher in the true winter allies, the chickens, the goats, maybe even the half-grown piglet if it's looking especially pitiful. They file in with clucks, bleats, and snorts, shaking snow from feathers and fur. Instantly, the room smells like a barnyard, but it also grows a shade warmer. And that is the bargain you accept. Peasant huts weren't single-use spaces. They were multi-tools of survival. The hearth cooked and smoked, the rafters stored grain and salted meat, and the floor often doubled as barn stall. Mainstream fact, in much of medieval Europe, people and animals shared living quarters during winter, partly to conserve heat, partly because building separate barns wasn't always possible for the poor. The animal's body warmth raised the indoor temperature just enough to keep frostbite at bay. You can imagine medieval architects advertising, "Our houses come with central heating goat edition." The chickens flap awkwardly onto their perch. Near the wall, feathers puffed against the chill. One goat noses into the straw heap, unimpressed with its bed, then promptly tries to chew on your cloak. You shove it away, muttering, "That's wool, not hay, and I'm not on the menu." Joke 1 bounces off the goat's blank stare. Children giggle as they scatter grain for the hens, tiny feet scratching the rushes on the floor. Rushes themselves are a kind of seasonal carpeting, bundles of reeds strewn to soak up spills, smoke, and the general indignities of living with livestock. Every few weeks you sweep them out and lay fresh ones, turning the floor into a meadow that happens to smell like stew, sweat, and goat. Quirky tidbit, some households swore by hanging dried herbs like lavender, tansy, or even wormwood among the rushes to deter fleas. Does it work? Well, let's just say the fleas don't complain. In writing, you crush a sprig of rosemary under your heel tonight and pretend it's medieval. For breeze, historians still argue whether this practice of cohabiting with animals was a sign of poverty or just practicality across all classes. Some wealthier farmers kept barns but still sheltered prized animals like milk cows indoors when frost bit deepest. For peasants like you, though, it wasn't debate. It was math. 1 cow inside equals 1 fewer child shivering. The downside: noise all night long. Animals mutter in their sleep, goats sigh, hens cluck, pigs grunt like dreamers in heated argument. Your partner rolls over, grumbles, "It's like sleeping in a tavern." And you reply, "Cheaper drinks, though." Joke 2 earns a sleepy chuckle before the rooster interrupts with a premature crow. You glare at it and mutter, "Too early. Go back to bed." Joke 3 fizzles in the straw, but the children snicker. Still, in this crowded warmth, you feel safer. Predators prowl beyond the village: wolves, foxes, and worse, but here inside, your animals huddle like companions, eyes glinting in the dim firelight. The shared breath fogs the air, heavy and rank, yet undeniably alive. Every inhale says, "You're still here, all of you." You patch a hole in the roof with a bundle of straw while the goat supervises, then settle back down. The hut is cramped, smoky, noisy, and fragrant in ways no poet would praise, but it's warmer than outside, and that is enough. Tonight, survival is communal. Man, beast, and child forming one stubborn, steaming organism against the cold. Morning light limps through the shutters, grey and reluctant, as if even the sun doesn't want to work today. But you have no choice. In winter, idleness is as deadly as frost. The animals need feeding, the clothes need patching, the tools need mending. Work never stops, because the moment you sit too long, the cold slides into your bones and hunger creeps closer. You reach for the broken rake handle you've been meaning to fix since harvest. The wood split near the peg, so you shave down a branch with your knife, fitting it into place like a puzzle. It's not pretty, but it will do. That's the rhythm of peasant repair, not perfection. Just does it still work? Mainstream. Fact. Medieval peasants spent more time repairing than replacing. Iron was costly, timber had to be permitted, and every tool was too precious to discard. So, mending was constant, and creativity was currency. Beside you, your partner spins wool on a drop spindle. The whirl hums softly, and the fibers twist into yarn with practiced ease. Children chase the spindle's swing, laughing until their scolded yarn becomes thread, thread becomes socks, socks become a day with warmer toes. You watch, admiring, and mutter, that spindle spins more miracles than a saint. Joke 1 makes your partner smirk without looking up. Later, you patch the roof with bundles of straw carried from the loft. Climbing onto the thatch is tricky, the slope is icy, and the straw itches through your gloves. But a leaky roof in January means mold in February and collapse in March. You tamp the new straw down, tie it tight, and pray the wind respects your work. Historians still argue whether most peasant roofs were carefully layered or just haphazard heaps replaced yearly. You suspect the answer is yes, depending on how tired the builder was. Inside, the children scrape old iron pots with sand. To scour them, quirky tidbit, medieval households often used sand or even ashes as abrasive cleansers. Soap was expensive, so grit and elbow grease did the job. You watch them rub until their arms ache, then praise them as if they've won a tournament. Their faces glow part pride, part soot. By midday, you're darning hose, needle biting through wool. The hole gapes like a tiny mouth. You stitch until it becomes a scar. Your partner hums a hymn under their breath, not quite tuneful, but steady. A rhythm that fills the smoky room better than silence. The children carve little toys from spare wood, knives flashing under careful eyes. A tiny horse emerges, clumsy but loved. You grin. Ah yes, the famous warhorse of our village, Sir Splinter. Joke 2 earns laughter sharp enough to warm the air. When the chores ease, you fetch the grindstone to sharpen the sickle, though the fields are asleep. Why sharpen now? Because spring will come suddenly, and you can't face it with dull steel. Work in winter isn't just about today. It's about tomorrow's ambush. You spit on the stone, turn the wheel. Listen to the scrape as sparks flit like tiny stars. Evening falls, and your hands are raw. You stretch them toward the fire, joints creaking, knuckles swollen. Laziness in January is lethal, you mutter, remembering neighbors who lost roofs or livestock because they rested too long. It's not drama, it's arithmetic. Work equals survival, you chuckle tiredly. Congratulations, you've joined the medieval gym. Membership fee, everything you've got. Joke 3, delivered through cracked lips, but your children giggle anyway. You settle on the bench, threadbare cloak draped over your shoulders, and admire the patched rake, the sharpened sickle, the pile of yarn, the smoke-scrubbed pots. None of it will win prizes, but each small act keeps winter a step away from winning. The hut creaks, animals mutter, fire sighs, and the work for tonight is enough. Asterisk, the bells ring faintly across the frost, and you know what that means today? Is a feast day. For once, the village trudges not toward fields or forests, but to the church hall, where a long wooden table has been dragged into place. Your stomach growls at the thought of real food, of something more than turnips boiled. Until they surrender, you pull on your patched cloak and follow the stream of neighbors. breath hanging in the brittle air like ghostly banners. Inside, the air is thick with warmth and chatter. Someone's brought a jug of ale, another a loaf of rye bread, another a dish of salted herring. The priest presides, reminding everyone this meal is a gift from God and a reminder of humility. Still, as you take your place, you can't help grinning. This is more food, in more variety, than you've seen in weeks. Mainstream fact: the medieval calendar was packed with religious feasts and holy days, many of which allowed even peasants to share in communal meals, sometimes provided by the church or wealthy patrons. The first bite nearly makes you dizzy. Pork fat sizzling on barley bread, spiced with a pinch of pepper someone miraculously traded for at market. You chew slowly, savoring every grain, every drip. Children laugh, mouths full, cheeks red. For a few hours, hunger loosens its grip, and life tastes like celebration. A quirky tidbit: during big festivals, villagers sometimes roasted whole animals, like a pig, or even an ox, turning it slowly over a fire until the smell drew people from miles away. And sometimes the hides were stuffed with straw afterward and paraded through the streets like a puppet. You imagine your goat being marched around, stuffed with straw, and mutter, "Careful, or you'll end up in next week's parade." Joke: one gets your neighbor to choke on his ale. But feast days are the exception. Tomorrow, it's back to scarcity. And worse, Lent is coming. 40 days of fasting, where meat and dairy vanish from the menu, even for those already half-starved. You sigh into your cup, whispering, God must have been well fed when he made that rule. Joke 2 lands quietly among the clinks of pottery. Historians still argue whether peasants actually followed fasting rules strictly, or if many quietly bent the rules to survive. Officially, no meat, milk, or cheese. Unofficially, you suspect more than a few eggs found their way into stews, hidden under the name Lenten allowance. After all, survival has always been the peasant's truest religion. As the feast winds down, you glance around at faces glowing in firelight, weary, but softened by food and company. For once, nobody argues, nobody counts turnips. Even the priest laughs at a bawdy joke about a saint, though he crosses himself afterward. Your children dance in the corner, stomping the rushes flat, singing nonsense rhymes until they collapse into straw piles. Later, you shuffle home, bellies warm, spirits lifted. Yet even as you latch the door, you feel hunger's shadow returning. Feasts are bright sparks in the dark, but sparks fade fast. You sigh, hang your cloak, and whisper, well, back to pottage tomorrow. Joke 3 floats into the smoke as you crawl under your blanket. Asterisk. The hut is quiet but restless, the fire low. When your partner mutters about their hands, fingers cracked and swollen, tips white from too many icy mornings at the well. You squint at the raw skin and reach for the onion bundle. Not for cooking this time, it's medicine. You slice a sliver, lay it across the wound, and tie it down with a strip of cloth. It stings so sharply you mutter, "Congratulations, you're cured by pain distraction." Joke 1 gets a tired laugh, but the ritual continues. In winter, folk cures crowd the hut like invisible guests. Garlic is rubbed on frost-bitten skin, goose grease smeared over cracked heels, a sprig of rosemary tied above the door to ward off illness. Some whisper charms in the dark, believing the right words carry weight against fever. Mainstream fact: medieval medicine for peasants was mostly herbal and homegrown. Doctors existed, but for lords and cities. Villagers relied on apothecaries when they could, and on knowledge passed down in families when they couldn't. You crush garlic into warm ale for your coughing child. The smell fills the room, pungent and defiant. They sip, grimace, and whisper, "Tastes like dragon breath." You grin. Good. That means the dragon's leaving. Joke 2, accompanied by garlic-scented giggles. Quirky tidbit: some people believed wearing charms like a dried frog in a pouch, or a tiny carved cross of rowan wood could keep away fevers. Others swore by drinking water in which a church bell had been dunked, claiming the holiness seeped into the liquid. You eye your well bucket now, briefly imagining dipping the village bell in it. Then you laugh at yourself. because carrying the bell home would be a workout worthy of its own feast day. Historians still argue whether most peasants believed more in herbs or in charms, or if both were just used side by side without question. To you, the division doesn't matter. When your child coughs through the night, you'll try onion poultices, whispered prayers, and a charm carved into the lintel, anything that might make the cough stop. As you rub goose grease into your own cracked knuckles, the smell clings thick and oily. You mutter, smells like a roast dinner, feels like desperation. Joke 3 makes your partner chuckle, even as they wrinkle their nose. The truth is, winter breeds illness. Cold huts, smoky air, little food, your body weakens your defenses. Fall remedies are as much about hope as healing. Each charm, each herb, each whispered prayer is a reminder you're still fighting, still refusing to give the cold and sickness the final word, so you tie the garlic braid tighter on the wall. Tuck a charm under the children's straw mattress, and sip your onion ale tonic with a grimace. Maybe none of it works. Maybe all of it does. Either way, you go to bed feeling guarded, and, in a season like this, that sense of protection might be the strongest medicine of all. Asterisk, the coughing starts at midnight. It rattles through the smoky dark of your hut, like an uninvited guest. First, the child, then your partner, and before long you're clearing your throat to you sit upright, listening to the hacking chorus, praying it fades. But in winter, illness spreads faster than warmth. The shared air, the crowded beds, the endless dample of it conspires to turn one cough into a household symphony. You reach for the garlic braid, half talisman, half medicine. Crush a clove, slip it into warm ale, pass it to the child. Their face twists in disgust, but they drink anyway. You rub goose fat into their chest, whispering a prayer under your breath. Mainstream fact: winter illnesses were rampant in the Middle Ages. Coughs, fevers, and lung ailments made worse by smoky homes and poor diets. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and influenza-like sicknesses haunted every winter season. And without modern medicine, the line between lingering cold and deadly illness was perilously thin. Quirky tidbit: some villagers swore that placing a live toad in a muslin bag and wearing it around the neck could draw illness out of the body. You glance at your partner now and mutter, "If I tell you I'm bringing home a toad tomorrow, don't ask questions." Joke 1 gets a weak laugh before another cough interrupts. Historians still argue whether Plague the Black Death returned in small cycles throughout winters, or whether it arrived only in great waves. What's certain is that people lived with constant fear of pestilence, often seeing disease as divine punishment. Tonight, as the coughing continues, you wonder whether God listens or if he's as deaf to hacking lungs as the wind outside. You try onion poultices on your partner's feet. Wrap wool tighter around the children, and stoke the fire for more warmth. The hut fills with the smell of garlic, smoke, and fear. Someone whispers a charm against fever. Words carried down from grandmother to granddaughter, part prayer, part spell. You don't know if it works, but you cling to it anyway. By dawn, the coughing has eased to whispers. Your throat aches, but you're still alive, and so is everyone else in the hut. You exhale, a shaky laugh breaking through. Congratulations, we've survived another night. Now let's see what new mischief our lungs invent tomorrow. Joke 2 lands softly, but it's enough to bring a flicker of hope. You step outside into the brittle morning air. Lungs raw, head heavy. The village is already alive with the same chorus: neighbors, coughing, sniffing, clearing throats. Misery loves company, and in medieval winters, sickness is the closest companion. Still, you walk back inside, ladle thin pottage into bowls, and remind everyone that survival isn't about being strong, it's about being stubborn. That night, as you lay down again, the coughs return, softer but insistent. You close your eyes and whisper, "If laughter really is medicine, we're dosing ourselves properly." Joke 3 wheezes out as you clutch your blanket and pray the dawn comes quickly. Asterisk. You scratch a tally into the wooden post by the door, one more line added to the forest of scratches already there. Each mark stands for a day survived, a silent rebellion against the cold. The post looks like it's sprouted a strange bark of human stubbornness. You run your fingers over it, wondering if spring will come before you run out of wood to carve. Fields outside are white deserts. Snow clings heavy to furrows that once held wheat, barley, beans. You imagine them awake beneath the frost, little roots humming wait. The sun is a pale coin that buys you nothing but shadows. Yet each day you peer toward the horizon, hoping for the first hint of thaw. Mainstream fact: peasants often marked time through saints' days and church feasts, since proper calendars were rare. Candlemas in February, Lady Day in March, holy markers that doubled as survival checkpoints. If we reach Candlemas with grain in the sack, we might live to sow again. You chew on that thought while chewing stale bread. The crust is hard, enough to chip a tooth, but you soften it in hot broth. You grin and mutter, "Ah, medieval croutons, chef's special." Joke 1 crackles into the smoky rafters. Met with a few tired smiles. The children trace their own lines beside yours, messy scratches that tilt sideways. They ask how many days till green shoots return. You shrug and tell them, when the snow melts enough, the chickens stop looking offended. Joke 2 gets a burst of laughter, though one child points at the sulking hen by the fire and says, "That could take forever." Quirky tidbit: some villagers used candle stubs to measure winter's patience. Each night a candle was lit, and by its length they guessed how long till spring. Some even melted wax drippings into shapes and read omens in them. You imagine the wax pulling into a rabbit, a flower, a loaf of bread, hopeful signs. Even if only born of melted luck. Historians still argue whether peasants clung more to practical signs like bird migrations and thawing streams, or to mystical ones like omens and charms. Truth is, you look for both. A patch of green moss on the north wall, a sudden crow's call. A dream of summer fields, they all become weather forecasts. Because anything that hints you will see spring is worth believing. The tally marks grow, one after another. You glance at them nightly, whispering, "One less day of this, one step closer to warmth." Joke 3, said softly, turns into a bedtime prayer, half sarcasm, half devotion. And somehow, that strange mixture of humor and hope makes the tally post shine brighter than any candle. You run your palm over the tally post one last time tonight, and feel the grooves your knife left days carved into wood, like ribs on a lean body. The room still smells of smoke and boiled cabbage. With that faint, briny ghost of salted fish, you could probably recognize in your next life. Underneath it all, there's something sturdier. The knowledge that you haven't broken. You glance at the children breathing quietly, the goat pretending not to snore. The rooster sulking after his premature aria, and you realize winter has tried every trick it knows, and you are still hit-patched. Hungry, smoky, stubborn. But here, survival in this season isn't a heroic charge. It's a slow, patient march. You cinch the cloak around your shoulders and think of the modest inventions that made it possible. Patterns clacking you above the slush. The root pit turning the ground into a pantry. The hood, whose tail you wrapped twice when the wind bit. Like a dog with opinions, each was small. Together, they were a wall. Mainstream fact: most villages like you work scattered strips in an open field system, share common pastures, and carry a double load dose to the manor in labor or rent, and a tenth to the church in tithso, thrift, and community aren't virtues here, they're survival equipment. You remember the brief mercy of the feast day. The lean arithmetic of fasts. The way the well rope sawed a line through your glove and pride. You also remember the jokes you used as kindling medieval iced latte at the well. Liquid disappointment when a pot of snow collapsed into a single swallow. Sir Splinter, the toy horse promoted to General of Boredom, Central Hitting Goat. Edition, when the barn moved into the bedroom, humor wasn't decoration. It was another log on the fire. If laughter is medicine, you murmur, we've been dosing like apothecaries. Joke 1 drifts up with the smoke and lingers. Warm and a little ridiculous, you bank the embers and brush a finger over the charred sliver of Yule log you keep tucked under the bedstraw. Quirky tidbit: some folks swear that if you kindle next winter's fire with last winter's coal, Misfortune keeps missing your door like a confused visitor. You're not sure about the theology, but you like the continuity, one flame kissing another across a whole year. Certainty is a summer luxury. Winter accepts down payments in faith. The hut answers with its night noises, sparks whispering up the smoke hole, hens murmuring, your partner turning with a straw rasping sigh. Beyond these walls, the village moves in its own quiet, a neighbor reading futures in candle drips, another beating a cloak to chase smoke into the wool, someone sharpening a sickle even though the fields lie white and speechless. Historians still argue whether the severity you feel belongs to ordinary medieval winters or to wider shifts in climate. The Little Ice Age that some date to the late 1300s and others to much later, but argument doesn't light a hearth. You nod to the debate and feed the ember anyway. You inventory the quiet wealth you've learned to count. 3 onions still firm, 2 turnips with honest hearts, a braid of garlic shaped like a promise, barley enough if no one grows greedy, and a small piglet growing toward bacon if wolves and taxes show mercy. Your tools wait in a tidy rotherrake reshafted, the sickle bright along its edge, the pots scoured with ash until they remember how to shine. A neat cake of yarn by the fire looks like a coiled moon, not fortune, perhaps, but a vocabulary of survival you now speak without thinking. You close your eyes and picture spring, not as miracle, but as sequence. Candlemas candles stub low. The thaw arrives with a smell of worm and leaf. A frog appears at the ditch like a clerk announcing services. Lambs bleat and milk returns to buckets warm as hands. The soil, finally persuaded, gives back what your back asks of it. Mainstream fact to keep hope honest. After the worst hungry gap, milk and fresh curds usually come first, well before grain ripens, and, that soft, new dairy often decides whether families limp to harvest or stumble. Debts will outlast. The snow tithe to the church, corvée days in the Lord's fields, favors you owe neighbors who lent you a tool or an hour. None of that melds with the drifts. But neither does the ledger of kindness. You stack those credits carefully. 2 leeks for a braid of onions. The borrowed ice key bar, a shared laugh at the well that made a heavy bucket lighter. Joke 2, recorded in your private book. Your credit is excellent at the bank of turnip. Interest paid in stew and gossip. The invisible economy hums, warmer than the visible one. Your hand strays to the tally post again, to that thicket of scratches, and you imagine other hands doing exactly this same cold, different century. You're not special. You're continuous. Pride might prefer singularity, but comfort lives in a line of stubborn people who refuse to vanish. They faced smoke-stung eyes and onion poultices, patterns and peat, salted fish and watered ale, and kept getting up anyway. Historians still argue whether ordinary people left enough trace to call their lives remembered. But you feel the truth under your palm. Remembrance can be tactile, not textual. A groove in wood counts. So does a child's snore. You tend the last tasks like a liturgy, ash laid thick over a small red heart so morning finds a live ember. Kettle set where it will think about boiling all night. Wooden disc floated in the animal's trough so ice forms with manners. Herbs nudged back from the firebeam so sparks won't gossip. These are tiny, but they form a curriculum. Survival has a syllabus. You've nearly finished the winter term. With passing marks and smoky hair. Outside, the wind noses along the eaves and, for once, decides you've earned a quiet patch. Inside, you tug the cloak over the children and tuck the hood edge beneath your cheek. For a last moment, you let your mind play, patterns clacking on thawed lanes. Goats outraged to be evicted because Central Heating Goat Edition is ending. The root pit emptied and transformed into a fort, Sir Splinter promoted to Marshal of the Fields. Joke 3 escorts you to the edge of sleep, silly, soft and gentle as a wool hem across your eyes. You breathe in smoke and time and something like victory. Not triumph, that's a Lord's word, but victory of the humble kind, which is simply not yielding. Winter will come again. Hunger will clear its throat. Ropes will burn palms. Water will freeze with theatrical flair. And you, and those after you, will dress in layers, make soups of roots, salt fish in generous years, share heat with animals, sharpen tools in idle hours, help a neighbor at the well, and hang charms that may work chiefly by steadying your own heartbeat. You are not the first to do this, and you won't be the last. That is the point. Endurance is the family trade. You refuse to give up because you were taught how not to, because the ground keeps secrets for you, because an ember the size of a coin can grow a fire again, because hope in salty, onion-scented hope still fits in a bowl. Slowly now, you loosen your grip on the tallypost and let the room settle into a softer shape. The fire purrs rather than crackles, breath rises and fades an even ribbon, and the cold stays politely on the far side of the wall. You picture the fields sleeping under their white blanket, each furrow a long calm breath, each hedgerow a gentle shoulder holding back the wind. The goat resettles the rooster, forgets the time. Even the rafters stop their little arguments and agree to be quiet beams for a while. As you lie back, the layers that kept you alive become cushions linen, smoothing the itch of wool. Wool holding the secret of your heat, cloak becoming a patient sky. Patterns of the day lengthen and soften. Water, drawn without hurry, wood, stacked without strain, a pot simmering in the slow grammar of evening. You let the jokes dim to embers and keep only their warmth. In the corner of your mind, the root pit is a hush of straw and sweetness. The well is a dark circle that gives and gives. The tally marks are a gentle pathway you no longer need to count if the wind speaks at all. It is in kind syllables, rounding the house with a hand that only smooths. The future is a garden seen through morning mist edges, indistinct, colors, tender, nothing urgent. Even the chores wait respectfully beyond the threshold of sleep, knowing that rest is part of the work. You are carried now by small, steady things. The ember under ash, the rhythm of shared breath, the memory of warm milk in a wooden cup. Let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw unclench. Let your thoughts stretch out like cats near the hearth and become very quiet. The night will keep its watch, the ground will keep its promises. The morning will come when it comes, and it will find you ready, and warm, and whole.